Chris, I want to thank you for taking the time to be here this morning.
Well, thank you very much, Lance. It's good to be here, Lance.
Where were you born?
Well, I was born in Canada, in Rocky Mountain House, Alberta, which is near Calgary.
Okay. And you stayed there the majority of your
No.
adolescent life, or what?
No, I don't really have any memory of Rocky Mountain House so much. My family moved to northern Alberta, and then I lived in Saskatoon from the time I was about 13 or 14.
Now tell me, in Canada, I know Canada generally. Where is it? Is that more mid or is that more the east?
It's north of Montana, North
Okay,
Dakota.
so it's right in the mid. It's mid.
Yeah.
Do you have siblings?
Yes, I have one of 5 children.
One of 5 children. And where are you ranked?
I'm the youngest.
Okay, tell me what's above. What's the first number? First one's a girl, boy, or?
I have 3 brothers and 1 sister.
And where are they ranked? Number 1 is?
Well, they're all older than me, but
Right.
yeah, the directly older than me is my sister, and then I have 3 older brothers.
Who's above that? Are you guys close?
Fairly, I guess. Yeah,
How many years between you and your oldest brother?
11.
11 years.
Yeah.
Are you the only one that's left Canada? Are they still there?
Well, my brother Dave lives in Minnesota and Palm Springs. He divides up his time. Obviously, it's Palm Springs in the winter and Minnesota.
How many years did you say there between you and your oldest brother? You said 11? Between you
11.
11 years difference.
And then 10. And
That's
then I
a
think
lot,
my other
yeah.
brother's 6 years older than me, and my sister is 3 or 4 years older than I am.
Okay. Are you close with her?
A little bit.
Okay. So, okay, growing up, tell me, Chris, growing up, were you more academic as a child, elementary and junior high school, or were you more physical?
I was always very academic. Yeah.
You were?
Yeah.
So what'd you do? Like, what'd you like doing as a kid? I mean, did you read a lot? Did
I
you
read
read
quite a lot. Yeah.
Did you? Okay,
Yeah.
what kind of books did you like to read?
Almost everything. Yeah.
Really? You had nothing that you preferred over other
Uh,
areas, like sci-fi versus...
I didn't really
drama?
read science fiction. I mean, mostly I read the books that were in my house and my mother kind of picked out. I would read pretty much anything.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what kind of work did your father do?
My father's an Anglican priest.
Oh, is he?
Yes.
So you grew up in an Anglican church, I imagine.
Yes.
So what was that? Tell me what that was like for you. I mean, what do you remember? Because you're the last child. Let me say this. First of all, your parents were well trained by the time you came along. And I don't think that you would have gotten the least amount of attention, maybe a little bit at the beginning, but the oldest boy is now, they were going through so many people living their lives now, and you're the very bottom. Your sister, no, she was too young to take care of you. And your brother, I don't think they'd have him doing it. I know, it'd be interesting. So,
I see.
I'm just thinking about the dynamics of a family.
Wow.
Am I pretty correct?
Well, yeah, I mean, they'd kind of given up on the discipline.
You are on your own, basically.
Yeah, well, my mother she'd discipline my brother with a wooden spoon, but then it broke, and then she gave up on it.
Just in time. How old were you when that happened?
Well, I can remember it, so I can't be that old. It must be 3 or 4.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I think after seeing a couple of your brothers being disciplined, you figured, hey, whatever they're doing, I'm gonna make sure I try not to do it.
If I remember properly, both of my oldest brothers had left home before I was about when I was 5. I didn't really grow up with them.
So it means your oldest brother would have been 16. If you were 5 and he's 11 years older, he would have been 16 years old when he left.
Well, maybe I'm off a bit. So I guess it would have been 6 or 7 or something.
Okay, right.
Something around there.
Right. So they left when they were in their late teens.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did they go off into service or something, or they just left home?
No, my brother went to a private school my second oldest brother went to a private school in Winnipeg, and then my oldest brother went to a technical school, the Northern Alberta School of Technology. Yeah. NATE. Yeah.
Are your parents still alive?
No.
Or both of them passed?
Yes.
Okay. They stayed together the whole time?
Yes.
They did? Oh. So, I mean, were they close in age by any chance, or was there a big difference in their age?
Yeah, they were relatively close in age. My father was born in 1929. So my mother was born in I think she was born in 1932. So they're
Okay.
pretty close in age.
Yeah. Because your father's a year older than my mother. My mother's still alive. So your father would have been 95 now.
Yeah.
Yeah. 95 because she's 94. She'll be 95 this year. So Chris, growing up, do you remember anything that really impresses you now that you always go back to when you think about yourself as a young kid? How do you see yourself as a little kid? Who would be on the playground now if you looked on the playground? Who would you identify with? The guy in the corner sitting down with his books? Or
I don't know. It's very kind of abstract because until I went to Saskatoon, which is a major city, at least by Canadian standards, it would be a big city. I think now it's about 250,000 people. But at the time I lived there, when I first moved there, I think it was about maybe 130 or something like that.
And you were coming from, how big was the place you were coming from?
Well, I moved from Fort McMurray, Alberta, which at that time was a very kind of wild place. That's where they have the tar sands, the oil sands. Mm-hmm. Is centered there. I don't know if you heard about the Canadian oil sands.
No.
So that's like about the largest deposit of oil in the world, next to Saudi Arabia.
Okay. But it's difficult to use because it's in the sand.
Exactly.
Right,
yeah.
so they have to just take the sand away from it.
It's processed, yeah.
Right. So, and it's a real, it's very expensive to do
So
that.
that didn't start until like the OPEC crisis, after the OPEC crisis in about 1970. They began to think about using this oil sand. And we moved to Fort McMurray, I think it was in 1976. And at that time, the population was maybe 10,000. And by the time we left in about 1980 or 81, the population was about 30,000. So it like tripled in that time. So there's like always building going on. Mm-hmm. And it's extremely far north.
So very cold.
Extremely cold. I think that's the coldest temperature I experienced when I was there. It went to minus 44
Celsius.
Yeah, and they closed the school. You couldn't go to school.
You probably couldn't have gotten in it if you went there. Everything was frozen. So the town that before you moved to this town of 10,000, how big was the place you came from?
Oh, that was a small town as well. That was
everybody knew everyone.
That was my first memory when I lived in Athabasca.
Oh, okay.
That's a very kind of rural area. It's a
How many kids were in your school?
Area.
How many kids were in your school? Or did people go to school? Were they homeschooled?
No. We had schools. Okay. I don't know, maybe a few hundred. I don't really have that clear of a memory of it, other than, as I said, it wasn't, urban environment. Mm-hmm. It's surrounded by farms, and I think most of the area we lived in was very rural. And my one kind of memory, because I didn't really think about it, but I don't really think about it that much, but I kept a rabbit.
How old are you at this time?
I think I would be about 4.
Okay.
3 or 4, about 4 years old. Yeah. 4 or 5 years old. Well, we kept a rabbit. And then my mother didn't think we kept it very well. So at the time she was teaching at a Hutterite colony. So the Hutterites they're like the Amish, except that they use modern equipment, but they're isolated.
So they'll have a car. They can use a radio. They can
no radio.
So no media, but they do use like they'll use a saw. They'll use a power saw.
Yeah.
They'll have a motorcycle or a car so they get around.
Well, they're quite advanced with their agricultural techniques. Okay. So unlike the Amish, they don't use like old plows and things like that. They use combines and anyway. So she was.
They're still there? They still exist there?
Apparently, I heard there's a Hutterite colony. My friend sent me a link saying there's a Hutterite colony in Nasa, in Tochigi, but I don't.
Here?
Yeah, I didn't really look. I haven't looked into it.
That are Canadian, or are these Japanese?
That's based on a Canadian Hutterite colony. So I mean, I don't have an extensive knowledge of their religion, but essentially, I guess they left. I think they were founded by John Hutter, so that's why they're the Hutterites. Yeah,
I've never heard of that religion.
As opposed to the Mennonites, who were founded by Simon Menno. Can't quite remember. Okay. There's a lot of these religious groups in Canada because they were encouraged to come out because they needed people who would be able to settle on the prairies. So they had to be people with a kind of a strong commitment. It's a very extreme environment that I think it's interesting because the Japanese always go to like Banff or in the Rockies, or they go to Vancouver. Right. And sometimes they go to Niagara Falls. A lot of them go to Prince Edward Island for the Green Gables things. But I would say the prairie is a completely radically different experience and climate compared to Japan.
Or anywhere for that matter. Listen, so when you grew up there, how long were you there? In that area?
Well, I guess I lived in Athabasca, I guess, for about 5 years, and I lived in Fort McMurray for about another 5 years. And then after that, I just lived I was living in Saskatoon.
Okay, this is when you junior high school?
Well, they don't have junior high, but
how's your schooling go?
So I was kind of fortunate that way because the high school starts in grade 9. So I got there and I was in grade 9. So that was kind of good because everybody was kind of new. I didn't have to break in to develop to kind of relationships or whatever. So and then elementary school goes up to grade 8. Mm-hmm. So they just have the 2. They don't have junior highs.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Right. But you get out, you go to the 12th grade?
Yes.
Right. And usually most people are 18 years old, unless they come in early and they're 17.
Yeah.
So after that, when you finished school, did you go into college?
No, I went on a Rotary Exchange. I went to Matsumoto. That was the first time I came to Japan. So.
Was that the first time to be leaving Canada? Or had you left Canada prior to that?
Well, pretty much. I mean, I'd been to Washington State, and I've been to Montana.
Just went down south, yeah.
Yeah, but I've never been in any major U.S. city or anything. Right. Just on the border. I visited my brother because before he was living in Grand Forks. Okay. And it's not that much different, than living in Canada.
The weather's different though.
No, it's
very similar.
It's very similar. It's on the prairie, so it's basically it's very similar. That's why he moved. That's why he moved down there. Well, they recruited him as a doctor.
So your brother's a doctor?
He's a surgeon.
No, this is the oldest?
The second oldest.
Second oldest. How are all of your siblings alive and doing well?
Yes, they're all alive and doing well.
So
yes.
The oldest, what does he do?
Well, now he's doing what they call, he's a picker. I guess that's what they call it now. Well, I can imagine. He worked as a surveyor, but I guess he never really liked that so much. So now basically he goes around to like flea markets or, secondhand stores and garage sales and things, and he finds little different things and he resells them. Furniture and knickknacks and things like that.
I see. Yeah. So he can tell, so he does his homework and he knows what has value, what doesn't, and he goes in there, yeah.
Yeah, well, now he knows. I mean, he was doing it as a hobby for quite a long time, and now that's, I guess, kind of his profession.
That's interesting. Does he have a family?
He's married. He doesn't have any children.
Okay. Yeah. So your second brother, who's the doctor,
yes,
he's now in the States.
Yes.
Right. And does he have a family?
Yes, he has 2 children.
2 children, okay. Then your next brother after that, there's one more. One more, then a sister, then you.
Yeah.
Right. So the next brother, what's he doing?
He works in construction.
In Canada?
Yes.
He stayed close by where you grew up?
Well, he lives in Edmonton. So I guess that would be close to where I grew up, yeah. Yeah.
And your sister, does she stay in Canada?
She lives in Saskatoon.
Okay.
Yeah.
So she still stayed there.
Yeah.
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 Were your parents were there until they passed?
Yeah, they lived in Saskatoon. That was the last place.
Yeah. Because it's interesting. I'm just going on what I find to be common among the people I interview, and just from the time I've lived here. Most people tend to go wherever their wives live. You know, girls tend to come close to home.
Okay.
That's what I tend to. If they had a good relationship at home, if they didn't, they stay as far away as possible. but, so she went there, and is she married and have kids?
Yes, she's married.
Yeah. So that's what I'm saying. But I bet you he's not from there.
He's from around. He's from like rural Saskatchewan.
Oh, is he?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
So he went to the University of Saskatchewan. I know that part, but I can't remember exactly where he's from. But he's from rural Saskatchewan.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, that's kind of the divide.
You came over here straight out of high school.
Yes.
I guess 17, 18? Were you 18 when you came here?
I guess I was 18.
Okay, Rotary. And you went to where?
Matsumoto.
Matsumoto. And how long was this for 3 months or for?
1 year.
1 year.
Yeah.
And you were to teach English?
No.
What were you supposed to do?
I was an exchange student.
Okay, so you went to school.
Yeah.
To high school there?
Yeah. I mean, I guess sometimes I would, they would have me kind of do, I guess what's known now as the ALT thing. I was a high school student.
Right.
Yeah.
Was this school had a uniform and everything too?
Yes.
Were you the only foreigner?
I was almost the only foreigner in Matsumoto at that time. Yeah.
What year was
there were some missionaries.
What year was this?
1985, 86.
Okay. I got married in 86.
Yeah. So there were some missionaries who lived there.
Right. That was still a good time in Japan because it's before the bubble. And people had money like crazy.
Yeah, that was just starting because they had the G5 summit and they reevaluated the yen just when I got here.
But that didn't stop people from spending. They were still doing what they did. I mean, it was beautiful. Those times were good. At least in Tokyo, they were good.
Well, I think what I found interesting from that era, I was talking about it with a friend of mine recently, is at that time, there was no nostalgia in Japan. Like, now there's nostalgia. Because where I lived in Canada, it was like all the shows would be about, they weren't about the era mostly we're living in. They'd be about like the 60s or the 50s, like Happy Days or, the Wonder Years or something like that. It wouldn't be, but in Japan, I guess there's, there's like Chibi Maruko-chan, but generally on Sazae-san, which is kind of like an anachronistic.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
It's kind of a strange program that way because I think it's supposed to be in the present, but they live like they were in early Showa.
That's right.
Yeah.
Post-war, yeah.
Yeah. That's why there's that's why there's the age gap.
Right.
Between Sazae-san and
that's
her
where they're
brother.
living together and everything.
Yeah, I couldn't figure that out at first.
Right.
I didn't understand that that's his sister.
Right. That's right. Not his mother.
Yeah, I was thinking that's his mother, but no.
That's because of that time. It's that time. And that's most definitely post-war.
Yeah.
And I don't know, you don't want to be too nostalgic if you don't win. I don't think it's something you want to think about too much. So there's a big, you see what I'm saying? There's a big gap there.
Yeah. I wasn't really I didn't really consider that, but
And they're not proud of the fact that the country was so militaristic at the time.
Yeah.
They had a momentum stop. They don't even want to talk. It's very like going to Germany. It's the same thing. They don't want to talk. That part is just, nope, we don't, what, who? They don't want to talk about it. So let's not talk about it now. Anyway, so let's go on. Let's go on to the next thing. Let's not talk about that now.
Well, I didn't really take it that way. I just thought, they're very future oriented. They were looking forward to the future. They were not.
You doggone Skippy.
Yeah, they were not thinking about the past.
Right? They want to let that go. Forget that one. That's a whole nother. We don't want to talk about it. You're right. You're 100% right, Chris. They do not like to. They like talking about the future. Yep.
Well, though now there is nostalgia, but of course it's not.
Only up to the post-war. If it's about that, they talk a little bit about the bubble time or prior to that?
Yeah, I mean, they kind of have a rose-colored view of the pre-war period, not during the war, but the pre-war period. They kind of have a rose-colored view of it.
If when they touch upon it, yeah.
Well, I mean, they have some shows which are based kind of pre-war, you know, in the Meiji period or in the Showa period. But and of course, I think they've had quite a few things about basically in the high growth period, the 1960s. I think that's what they're nostalgic for now. It's kind of a high growth,
right.
the high growth era.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right. You're right.
Yeah.
So, Chris, when you went to Matsumoto, your year there, what was it like? Well, first of all, coming to Japan, why did you pick Japan?
That was based on kind of the choice of countries that I had because you applied to be on the Rotary Exchange, and at that time you're not assigned a country. You just apply and be accepted to be on the Rotary Exchange. So I had a choice of, I couldn't go to Australia because I was too old.
18 was too old.
Australia has a different school system, so
Okay.
it doesn't fit, I guess.
Okay. All right. So
and I wasn't really interested in going to Australia in any case. And then the other popular destination was Belgium, because they had no Rotary Exchange with France. And so a lot of people wanted to go to Belgium so they could work on their French. So because in Canada, that's, you know, if you want to be in the civil service,
I see.
if you want to advance, you have to be able to speak French in the federal civil service.
Right. Had you thought about doing that?
No. Okay. I wasn't. Unfortunately, I wasn't really interested in
civil service.
Well, no, I wasn't interested in learning French. I have to say, which I kind of regret. I had a lot of opportunities to learn French, but I didn't really think about learning a second language, or it wasn't much on my mind. One of the lucky things that happened to me when I was in high school is we had two teachers who were qualified to teach Latin. So I think it was about the only high school in Saskatchewan that offered Latin. So I took Latin.
Is that right?
Yeah.
From what grade to which grade? You did it for more than a year?
I took it from grade 9, and one of the advantages of it would be you could finish both 11 and 12 in 1 year. So I finished grade 11 and grade 12 when I was in grade 11.
Wow.
So
because you were taking Latin.
That gave me an extra spare period when I was in grade 12. See, what I didn't understand about language learning was, compared to other things, it requires more discipline, I guess you would understand. It's something you've got to work at regularly. But my methodology of studying was basically I would cram. I could quickly memorize things. So but it didn't really work for language, because you can't learn all your French vocabulary the night before or like a couple of days before.
You were doing Latin.
Yeah, but see, what I found out about Latin, well, first, the one thing was the way the teacher taught it would be, she taught it like the old style, which is she would just have us like chant. Amoa mas amant, amamas amamas amant. You know, I love, you plural love, and then they love.
Okay.
So that's the basic conjugation of the Latin verb.
Okay.
And so we would just kind of chant these things. So I didn't really have to in the beginning. And then what I learned later was, because this is the classic kind of British style of teaching Latin. So then when you get to the higher level, what you do is you read sections from the speeches of Cicero or the Aeneid by Virgil in Latin.
Yes.
So what I learned there was you could memorize it in English. You could memorize the English part, and if you just know enough to know where it's beginning, then you can just write it from memory, the English. Because they would say, translate this part.
Oh, that's what you had to do?
Yeah, you go translate this part. And I go, okay, that starts there. So I sing of arms in the man who first from the shores of Troy, blah, 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 blah.
I hear you, I got it
Yeah,
now.
that's the start of the Aeneid.
But you never had to write it in Latin. Now, what if
No,
they
no,
reversed it? What if they flipped it? That would have taught you something.
Yeah, that would have.
That would have taught you something. Got you out the class real quick. So I see what you're saying. Yes, I got that. I got that.
Yeah. So that's it. Kind of fit in more, but it kind of saved me when I came to Japan because I understood grammar and I understood like you could have a language where, you know, like in Japanese where the verb comes at the end. That's because that's the same as in Latin. They put the verb at the end.
Oh, they do. Okay, so it's very easy for you. Yeah.
Well, I wouldn't say.
I mean, easy, but at least you no. But
I wouldn't say it was very easy for me.
No, what I'm trying to say, Chris, is that the concept wasn't new to you. But for other people that have never gone through the concept of having the verb at the end, they find it really confusing. So you already, through Latin, you already knew that's possible, first of all, and still to learn it and to go through. That was good.
I didn't do very well in French. The problem was I just basically didn't see any point to it because I wasn't planning on going into the civil service or anything. But, I mean, I regret that I had, you know, very good opportunities. There's lots of opportunities in Canada to learn French. I mean, it gives me a great sympathy because people always say, you know, for Japan, oh, why don't they learn more English? But coming from Canada, I can understand that it's not so, I mean, it's easily said, and you would think, oh, well, they have all these incentives to do it. But if you look at Canada, so when they passed the Official Languages Act in the early 70s, the intended goal at that time was for Canada to become like a completely bilingual nation. I think initially they had some success, and so initially the number of bilingual people increased from 25%. I mean, I don't know if it was the exact figures, but it went up to a high. I think it got up to about 35%. But that was primarily based on people whose native language was French. So
I see.
Learning English.
English, right. It was
very few English speakers actually learned French.
Right.
So I can kind of understand, and especially because, you know, I guess this is not well understood outside of Canada, but, you know, there's the book about Quebec and the rest of Canada, which is called The Two Solitudes, which it really is. So most people in Canada, I have no idea about, you know, I mean, I guess Celine Dion came from Quebec. She might be the most famous Quebecois in all of Canada because her and maybe, you know, Pierre Trudeau and maybe René Lévesque, but mostly
people don't know anyone from Quebec.
We don't know anything about their culture, and they don't really. I mean, I guess it would be. They would tend to know more about English Canada
because the majority of Canada is English speaking.
Yeah,
that's why.
But there's still. I guess it's even there. They're still kind of focused on their culture.
Right.
I remember I was very shocked because when I was at the University of Hokkaido, they had a professor of literature come in to talk about Canadian literature. And then he started off by saying that I'm not going to talk about Quebec literature because it's a separate tradition. I'm only going to talk about Canadian. When I say Canadian literature, I mean Canadian English literature.
I understand, right.
Yeah.
I bet he was probably lucky that nobody from Quebec was there at the time. Had they been, yeah.
I don't. Well, no, I think they.
He didn't say it in an offensive way. He was just saying
that's just the way. That's just the way. That's just the way it is. It's unusual. Well, the Quebec writers generally don't want to write in English, and therefore, you know, they're not going to get read outside of Quebec.
That's right. So tell me this, Chris. So when you came over, you went to Matsumoto. You stayed there for a year. You went to school. What was that like? How'd your Japanese turn out?
I'd heard like, well, it's really hard to learn Japanese. And then I heard like most people, they learn it, but then, you know, they never use it and they lose it, right? I mean, I read this book by Donald Keene, his autobiography, I believe, and where he talked to some people and they said, no, I've totally forgotten all my Japanese. I can't imagine how that would exactly work. I mean, if you reached a level of fluency, some of it would come back to you.
It's like riding a bicycle. You'd have it.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I basically kind of questioned what would be the value of learning the Japanese.
You mean, wait, when you came over here?
Yeah.
After you came, wait, hold on. Now when you, now you had you ever dealt with anyone from Japan prior to coming here?
Not particularly.
Had you ever seen anyone in your area? There weren't many Asians that you were dealing with at all.
I can remember the first time I heard about Japan was when I was in grade 3. They showed us a movie, and it must have been from the 1960s because it started out with Edwin Reischauer talking about like how he just got stabbed by a right ultra-rightist. So it must have been from about like 1962 or something. Yeah.
And that's the first time. And
Yeah.
you were 3 years old. In grade 3. So
When
grade 3?
When I was in grade 3.
Grade 3,
yeah.
okay, right.
So that was kind of like, because Canadian, like the Canadian social studies is very different from the United States. So you don't really learn anything about Canadian history until you're in grade 12.
Is that right?
Grade 12 is the first focus on Canadian history.
Outside that, prior to that is the world.
We tend to look at the kind
Other
of
countries.
world history,
World
other
view,
countries.
right.
Yeah. Well, as I said, it wasn't. I have to preface it wasn't like. Well, I had kind of one good idea, which was I specifically didn't read any books about Japan or anything before I came to Japan because I thought I should just experience it for myself and not rely on what somebody, which at that time was good because there's a lot of really just ridiculous stuff. I guess still is written about Japan. I think I finally went after I was there a few months. I think I read Edwin Reischauer's The Japanese, so that was kind of more neutral.
Right.
And I also, I think that wasn't. Was that when I was in Japan? I read Ruth Benedict's The Chrysanthemum and the Sword. Well, I think I did read that in Japan because like a friend of mine from Canada encouraged me to read it. Okay. Yeah.
So tell me what happened after Matsumoto. You're there for a year. Mm-hmm. What happened then?
Well, then I went to university at the University of Saskatchewan.
Okay, so then you did go into college.
Yes, I did.
To study what?
Well, I studied history.
What?
Yeah.
Just regular history, European or
well, it's what
Asian
we would.
History?
Well, in order to satisfy my parents, I called it pre-law. Well, it turned out that I did go to law school eventually. At the time, I called it.
They were really trying to get you to become a lawyer?
They wanted me to be some kind. I think they wanted me to be some kind of professional.
Okay.
Yeah.
Be it even if it was academic, even if you were like a
they
professor or something.
Well, they weren't really so pushy that way. But although I think thinking back on it, I find it kind of strange because I just assumed that I would go to university. I never had any ideas like to do anything like what else would you do? Like it's just like well, it was kind of also the school I went to. I think like the classes I was in I think almost almost everybody went to university.
Okay.
Yeah. So
it was unexpected.
Yeah, I never really, that was the track that I was on. I never really considered to do anything else. And yeah, I believe, yes, I registered as pre-law.
Okay. And would you graduate with?
I graduated with a BA in history.
Okay.
Yeah, but I also have a JD and,
okay.
and an LLM. So
right.
I spent most of my 20s in
school,
in academic institutions.
So you stayed in. You did what? 8 years or 6 years of college?
Well,
after you graduated first.
Well, in Saskatchewan, at the University of Saskatchewan, you could do a BA in 3 years.
BA in 3 years.
Yeah, and the reason I did it in 3 years is because I wanted to get onto the JET program. The JET program had just started at that time.
All right.
Yeah, so. And that was also very interesting because I applied to be the coordinator for international relations.
Right. How'd that turn out?
Well, I became a coordinator for international relations, so I guess it was good.
Okay.
It was very interesting because I went to the interview, and I'm glad I did it then because I don't know how I could do it now.
Why is that?
Well, because they asked me a lot of stuff about Canada, which I wouldn't have on like.
But you haven't been in Canada. How would you?
Well, they asked me all these questions, like because you were supposed to kind of be an ambassador for Canada,
right?
And so,
course,
like,
yes.
yeah, they asked me like, oh, could you name 3 books
Okay.
to introduce Canada to people, or these kind of
Did
questions.
you know about these questions prior to you?
I had no idea what the
What they were
questions.
going to ask?
I had no
Okay.
idea what the questions
Wow.
would be. But the key thing was that I think got me in was a bunch of people had, I don't know why, but I guess they lied and said, I know Japanese, because I guess they thought there'd be like no Japanese.
They were going to test them.
Well, they're
I
testing
asked
you
the
at the
question.
they're testing you at the Japanese consulate, so I don't really know.
Why they would lie about that?
Well, at the
why?
time, like 1985, like people, Japan was a very kind of unheard of place, and so I guess people thought, I'll just say like I can speak Japanese, or maybe some of them could speak a little Japanese, but I guess none of them could read Japanese, because they gave me this children's book, and it was, Mukashi Mukashi Oba-san to Oji-san ga imashita. And they were like,
Whoa, blown away, boy!
you can actually read Japanese.
Yeah.
Because I taught myself to. So after I got over this kind of misstep of thinking I didn't want to learn Japanese, the reason I mentioned that was, so they decided, oh, well, we won't teach you Japanese. Oh, good. Because they'd have to get a teacher like to teach me Japanese. Previously, I guess, they didn't want to do it. So they go, oh, good. Well, then we can just leave you on your own. I think turned out to be the better way, because, when you learn something on your own, you really value it.
Not just that, or you get it, you learn up, over, or out. Yeah, that's on-the-job training.
Yeah.
You had no choice.
It took me, they gave me a textbook, and that was the other thing, which was, it was totally divorced from the speech I was hearing around me, because it started out with "O genki desu ka?" "Okage-sama de genki desu." It's like nobody
says that. No one ever says that.
I go like,
"Oh,
wow,
genki desu."
I've never heard this.
Where's it used?
And I remember like somebody said "genki," and I said "Okage-sama de genki desu," and they were like,
What's
"What?"
What's he talking to?
Well, I I guess you can't go wrong, but that's like the very. It was this very high level.
Keigo, yeah.
Yeah, it was this. They started with this Keigo. At the time, I guess maybe you would know. It was like, I just remember there's like this textbook or some kind of it was some kind of textbook, and it was sold on the basis of it is actually possible to learn Japanese. You remember that?
I kind of do, yeah.
Yeah, they had like this.
Right.
I don't know what the book was.
Right. I think I remember.
Because it was considered. To be
difficult, yeah,
almost
impossible.
Yeah, but the good thing that I did was, because I did it on my own, I decided I would learn to read Japanese. And they said, you're just completely wasting your time, because no foreigners ever learn to read Japanese.
These are other foreigners telling you this.
No, this is the Japanese people telling me that. They would just kind of laugh at me. It's like, but
it's not going to happen, yeah.
Well, I believe I learned to read because I had a lot of time on my hands. So within the first few weeks, I'd learned to read hiragana and katakana.
That's all it takes for that.
Yeah.
Really. Hiragana, katakana.
Yeah.
So when you get into the kanjis.
I put myself into it. And the kanji was, kind of an uphill struggle, but I think I'd learned like about maybe 200 at the end. I think that was very useful, because very few people could read.
At that time, particularly, too,
Yeah. And I later found out, like, because of Edwin Reischauer, so the Harvard method to learn it is they learn it in romaji.
That's right.
Yeah,
they do.
Which I can kind of see. I can kind of see it makes an equal playing field, because I studied at UBC, and if you have with a kanji in it, it gives a distinct advantage to the Chinese people, or the people who have some experience with it. So it makes it much more difficult, but. As a practical matter, there's nothing really written. There's nothing you can read. You can't really read if you start out from romaji. I don't know, because
you're making me think of something too. Because what years are you talking about right now? 1986, 7, around that time, right? And I came here in 74, and you are right. When you first got here, I guess it was starting to open up a little bit when you got here. But the psychic about the Japanese people and foreigners. First of all, foreigners thought it was impossible to learn the language, and the Japanese had not seen enough foreigners speaking it well enough to believe anyone could.
Well, yeah.
You understand what I'm saying? So you didn't have, David Specter hadn't really burst the scene so much, and he was just getting his footing.
He was getting his footing. He was just starting. I think I remember
Kent Delegate, Kent Gilbert, those were the two. You had two Mormons out there.
And Chuck Wilson.
Chuck he was my best man when we got married.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, Chuck
Yeah,
Wilson.
that was the first foreigner I remember seeing on
Chuck
television.
Wilson, and he was up there. He spoke Kansai then.
Yeah,
Chuck.
I remember distinctly.
Chuck
Yeah, he
Wilson.
was I think he was the first foreigner that I saw on TV, and kind of my host brother was translating for him, and I believe he said, "I would like to die in Japan," and I was like, "Whoa."
Whoa! This guy, whatever happened to him? What they do to this guy to make him want to die here? That's radical. He drank the Kool-Aid, didn't he?
That was I was reading that he introduced aerobics to Japan.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
but I don't really know.
That's interesting.
I mean, of course, this is a very different time because I don't want to take anything. Well, I guess Dave Specter, he's survived, but basically,
He's still here. Oh yeah.
Yeah, just being able to speak Japanese isn't that wouldn't get you.
Not anymore.
Not anymore.
No.
Yeah.
Because you know who really blew it out the water? The Australians. They started coming over here. When they came, listen, I remember when it happened. They came over here ready, and in a year they were speaking really well. They came over here with no Japanese, and all they did was study. Bingo! You had all these little white kids running around from Australia, speaking Japanese well enough to do more than most people had ever heard. So the Japanese couldn't talk about how difficult languages anymore because they blew it out the water. They most definitely did.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That wasn't American. It was the Australians.
Because I remember
The work study.
when I came on the JET program, I had to do a speech contest, and I thought, based on people around me, I thought I was doing pretty well.
Good, right.
And then I got there, and this Australian girl who just came out of high school, and I was like, "Oh, crap, maybe I should just go home. Maybe I should just fold up my speech and get out of here."
I mean, really, they came over here, no joke.
Yeah,
And
she gave a very impressive speech, and it
with
was
the
like very
intonation,
fluent.
everything.
Yeah.
They weren't like us. Watashi wa Lansley desu. We were still doing that stuff.
Yeah.
They came over here and they blew it out the water. And I saw it when it happened. I watched that and I said, the Japanese are going to think they have a language nobody can speak anymore. They just knocked it out of the water.
Well, I mean, there was...
Everyone started doing it after that.
Yeah.
Once Australians showed it could be done, there was no one that couldn't. Then listen, Iranians came in, everyone came in, Africa, everyone's over here. They speak Japanese like that now. So you came over here on the JET program.
Yes.
How long did you stay in the JET program?
I stayed for 2 years.
And where were you?
I was in Nikko.
Oh, you went to Nikko?
In Tochigi.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So then after that, you went back.
I went to UBC, University of British Columbia, for 1 year.
To get your LLC?
No, to study Japanese.
To study Japanese?
Yeah.
So now you decided at that time. Well, did you have a girlfriend or something now?
No.
Okay. You didn't, because that's usually a reason for a guy to want to study and come back. So, are you married now?
I'm married now, yes.
Is your wife Japanese?
Yes.
Do you have kids?
Yes.
How many kids do you have?
4 kids.
Okay. You've only been married once?
Yes.
Okay. Did you know? You said that, Chris, like as if you're not sure. I think I've been, really, physically I have been. Mentally, a lot of wives I've been thinking about. Anyway, so you have 4 kids. How old are your kids?
My daughter is 21, and so I guess she's 22. And my next son is 20, and then 17, and now 14.
17-year-olds what? A girl or boy?
It's 3 boys, and my oldest one is a daughter.
So you tried to copy your parents. The same thing. That gene must run through your family, I guess. You just didn't have as many kids, but you did the same thing. 1 girl among all 3 boys. My goodness. Yeah. Are they all here in Japan?
They're all here in Japan.
They're all here in Japan.
Yeah.
By any chance, do they speak any English?
Yeah, some of them.
Some of them. Wait.
Well, they have different interests.
Different interests. Okay.
Children. Yeah.
Huh? So does your oldest daughter speak English?
Not so much. She's very Japanese.
She's the Japanese. Is she the most Japanese of the 4 of them? Would you say?
Yeah, I would say. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is she married now, or is she still single?
She's 22.
Well, listen,
I guess they could.
Very easily.
Yeah, that's possible.
But they're not getting married at all now. They're waiting until they're not doing it. I have 4 sons.
Mm-hmm.
They're all in their 30s as
And-
of this January, past January. One's gotten married, the third one got married, and the second one is going to get married in May.
Oh,
But the oldest and the youngest are still waiting. They're not going to get married yet.
okay.
But yeah, it's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
When did you decide to start living here? After you went back after the JET program? Did you decide to live here after that? Well, how long have you lived here, first of all?
It's quite a long time.
What's a long time?
Well, I've been here continuously since 1997, and obviously I was here a little bit before that.
Okay.
So I guess it's getting
13.
close to 30 years,
Right.
most of my life. I think it was more a plan that I didn't want to be living in Canada. I didn't have a particular plan to be living in Japan,
But you knew you didn't want to live in Canada.
well, I can't really go back to Canada. There's nothing. What would I do?
Be the only one around there speaking Japanese. No, you can deal with Japanese tourists.
I mean, yeah, it's rather limited. I mean, basically from what I do, I would have to, I could move to New York, I could move to Los Angeles,
I
but
see.
there's.
So what do you do?
Although I know
Chris?
now some people with this remote work, they're moving back to
Well,
Canada.
now it's easy. Now it's easier.
Yeah.
I mean, COVID changed the whole landscape.
Yeah,
So now you can live on an island
yeah,
if you do that type of work.
yeah.
If yours is just, and it doesn't matter if it's just you saying something or writing something, you don't have to be there anymore.
Yes, yes.
If it's just that, but if it's required
Yeah.
physical labor of some sort, you need to be there.
Yeah, I was very surprised. I got a message from somebody who said they're moving back to Saskatoon. And I go, well, what are you going to do in Saskatoon? She said, I'm going to
Something I
do
do
what
here."
I'm kind of doing now, editing work.
Right
But
there.
I don't need to live in Tokyo to do
Sure
it.
don't. Isn't that
So,
interesting?
yeah,
It changed the whole
yeah,
paradigm.
yeah.
It's changed completely. So now we have a lot. Well, let's get another physical. Now we have a lot of big office buildings that are empty. They're
Oh,
actually empty. There's nothing in there, and they can't bring the rent down. So they're just thinking, someone come up with an idea, please, something that we can use this space. Well, come on, what are we going to do with all this? Because they built it up. We're at that era. They built it up for business purposes. Nobody has to be there for business.
well, I mean, in law, that's been the way it's been going. I mean,
In law.
it's been quite a while since you would like have face-to-face meetings with clients.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. So,
So you're
that's
what
been
what kind of lawyer are you?
I'm mostly I do kind of corporate work, and recently I'm kind of specializing into employment law.
Okay.
Yeah.
Before I end the podcast, there's a question I like to ask. With the knowledge you have now and all of your experience, if you could magically go back in time and meet the younger Chris, what time would you go back to, and what questions or what advice would you give him? Would you? Would you go back?
I don't know if I would, because you don't know. I guess that's the main thing that I've learned is you just don't know how things will turn out.
Right. You're happy where you are.
Yes. I think basically my view on that would be, that's the one thing I've really learned in my life is you just don't know how things are going to turn out. So I could go back in time and give myself some advice, but it could have an entirely different consequence than I'm thinking what it would do, right?
Right.
That's basically my view. So like now I'm very, even with my children, I'm kind of hands off. I don't say like, you got to do this or you got to do that, because there are a lot of things, that I thought, well, I mean, I guess the main thing was, I thought, when I came to Japan, and particularly after being on the JET program, I thought, oh, well, this is just going to go to the limit, right? That's what everybody was thinking back then, right? And now I kind of realized, oh, it didn't really go that way. There's just so much you can't control. But I mean, I don't think I would change my path necessarily in any case, because I like what I'm doing now. So
That's beautiful.
that's just like that's
I want
the
to
way
thank
it
you,
is.
Chris. That's beautiful. I want to thank all of you for watching this podcast. Make sure you press like and subscribe. And never forget, it's all unknown. So continue to reach for the stars because you're too blessed to be stressed.